What's your sole purpose? It's what you came here to accomplish. It's also who you're meant to become so that you can make an impact by being yourself. We're all here to unlock our potential and create positive change in the world. Everything starts with you. One is not born. Welcome to Born to Do It, a podcast about the positive change makers around us. We're having some technical issues today where presentations are not loading as they're supposed to, which means this is an important conversation. This is how we're going to interpret this. I'm excited to welcome a fellow alchemist, Alchemist, Portia Tung. Welcome to Born to Do It.
Oh, it's lovely to be here and to work in support of your work, Stella.
We cut our introduction a little bit short, but that means there's more time to play. And my first question to you would be, how did you find your calling to be a play alchemist?
Yeah, it started not long after I started my first job, actually. I think growing up, I was promised, especially being Chinese and female, I was promised, the golden goose and the golden eggs, and life will be fantastic if only I studied and worked really hard. Put my toys away, I just focus on what's needed, and things will be good. And of course, when I showed up in my first couple of jobs, I quite quickly realized that instead of, the Pridelands in The Lion King, it was more like the elephant graveyard, it was very hyena, dog eat dog. And it wasn't just the inner child, it was all of me. It was very allergic and disappointed at what it was. So very quickly, my seeking circuit, I'd call it in affective neuroscience, my seeking circuit set me off a journey to find ways of making work more fun. And that's how I got into something called Agile, an Agile methodology, which at its core and at its origins is really about enabling human potential and bringing and putting people back into the heart of work.
Yeah, and back into the present moment. I think a lot of people, they're just roaming around the world, but they're not really there. They're thinking about their fears and their dreams and, oh, how are people perceiving me? But they're not fully in their bodies, fully in their minds and in their hearts to be able to channel that potential that you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I refer to that as agile zombies, when we follow something very pedantically, but we no longer have engaged our independent thinking. But this is very understandable, given our upbringing, our responsibilities, the societal pressures, and the kind of social engineering that goes on to dampen our connection to ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think this is why people lose their joy as well. They're just not connected. They're not rooted into the present moment.
Well, and it's impossible to be rooted in something if you are a wonderful seedling or plant and you find yourself in compost that is just not a hospitable place. So when we dampen our difficult emotions, we stop ourselves from feeling everything else. And that includes joy, of course.
Beautifully said. I wonder, what are your thoughts about lotus flowers? Because they bloom in the middle of the mud.
Well, yes, and mud is not inhospitable to the lotus flowers,
Exactly.
right? Yeah, and is it Thich Nhat who said, no mud, no lotus, right? And I think that's part of the transformation journey. We each have to find our way. And whilst mud itself might evoke some disgust if you're not into messy play and all of that, because we think we grow out of it, but actually it's where we need to return to really find our resources and blossom.
I love that. And it kind of brings me back to the idea that we have to start with who we are, understanding who we are. Because sometimes a lotus flower needs precisely the mud, because they're that lotus flower that's going to bloom and blossom in that environment. But if you're a tulip, if you're a rose, you're going to need a different environment. And we know about roses, they have thorns. So,
yeah,
they
well,
have protection mechanisms.
And roses need manure, and that might not be something you'd want at your
Exactly.
dinner table as a human being, but it's a delight and a joy to roses. So we all need different things. But I think fundamentally what attracted me to your podcast is the idea that we're all interrelated, So if something's not working for you, it will affect me too, when we are part of the same system.
And we've seen that in workplaces where people get together because they want to bring a passion project to life. In the process, they kind of lose their spark. They kind of lose what they can bring into that company, into that project, into that collaboration, without understanding that their inner world has an impact on the overall status of that project or that workplace. That if they're feeling sad, if they're feeling neglected, they're going to bring some of that out into the open. How do we play as adults? I think this is one of the fastest way for us to shift our frequency, to shift our energy, and return to a more carefree state where we're more receptive to the science of the universe.
Yeah, absolutely, Stella. So I start with the definition of true play, and that's from Dr. Stuart Brown. And he defines true play as safe play, fair play, and being a good sport. So I'm just going to repeat that for everybody.
Mhm.
True play is safe play, fair play, and being a good sport. And what adults typically respond when they hear this is they say, well, actually, then it's not safe in my workplace to play because it's not safe. You know, it's dog eat dog. I have to watch my back. And this is from the people who are my team, you know. And I think that's a very commonplace experience for many of us. And that's why it's so difficult to bring our playful selves to work. But what I would say as well is that when we are doing something that's fun and enjoyable, how do we know it's play? So I'm taking Dr. Stuart Brown's work to honor that. I summed it up as what I call a 3F test. So I ask myself, whatever it is I'm doing, I just pause for a moment. I say, is it fun? Is it flexible? And is it freely chosen? So if it passes my 3F test, then I'm like, okay, that's pretty good. And if it only meets one or two criteria, then I can come up with ways to make it more enjoyable, no matter how tedious it is. And bringing it all back to work as well, I think it's about where you're starting from. You can choose to love the job you're in, or do the job you love. Love the job you're in, or do the job you love. And if you're in a really fantastic position and maybe you've done quite a lot of self-work, because that's the only way I've seen this happen, is when you get both, right?
Yeah.
But for most of us, we have to make a living, and that's not a bad thing, right? That gives us purpose, even if it means it's just putting bread on the table, be it for ourselves, for our
Absolutely.
family, to fund our lifestyles and to fund our passion projects outside of work. To love what you do. And that's really about optimizing what you have. And it's not just about exercising gratitude, it's about feeling compassion for yourself, but also for the colleagues who might be spiky and difficult, right? Not everyone looks like a lotus, and sometimes they might look like the thorns on a rose instead. But to recognize that they have their own challenges in life. And the key thing is, I always say, since I did my professional coaching training over 8 years ago, is that it's really easy for us to turn the mirror to say, oh, look at this. This is where you are. This is what you look like. This is how you're being. This is how what you're doing upsets me. To whenever we feel that that pushing away of ourselves to get everyone else to look at this mirror, and aren't I clever? Because I have this fantastic mirror that will tell you exactly what you are. We turn that back to ourselves. And this is very difficult and challenging, right? But when we embrace the mud, when we embrace the compost that we have, then we find a way and we evolve. And that's really important.
I love this. And I love that you mentioned free will, because I think that's something that people tend to forget, that they have the free will to participate or not participate, to change the game of their life, to preserve their right to play and to be joyful and to be gleeful. And if you think about some of the greatest works of art, they talk about the war times and how their spirit remained in a state of joy because they wanted their spirit to persevere despite the difficulties. And sometimes our workplaces feel like a war zone because everyone is stressed. They
Yeah.
can't rise to that level.
And I want to just take this back a little bit to the history of play as well, because there's a very famous painting, and I'm not going to pretend I can say his name correctly, but it's Peter Bruegel, and he did this wonderful painting of, you know, over 100 different types of play in the marketplace in the Middle Ages, right? And research shows that actually from primary and secondary sources, that back in those days, parents would actively neglect their children because of infant mortality, you know? And I think a lot of that has come through as well to the way we do work. You know, the way we become addicted to our devices. Of course, there's like, you know, a neurological evolutionary way of how our attention gets gripped. And so we want our dopamine hits. And there's all of that addiction. But I think it travels far, far back in time.
Mhm.
And yet, when you look at that gorgeous painting, you can see over a different 100 ways of playing. And the children are just getting on with life. And as are adults, right? And really, I feel that when I play, it's a public service. So that's what keeps me going, you know, that no matter what, I'm doing my bit. And the other thing I want to add about the Middle Ages to remember about work is that even if the children were able to live past the age of 5, they themselves could see around them that by the time they are 10, it's likely they would have lost their parents. So when you think about how difficult those times were
Mhm.
compared to now, and it's a comparison, not a competition, then we notice that these are challenges that our ancestors have
Mhm.
somehow managed to overcome. And for us to be lucky enough to be here, right? We've got like over 1,000 of those ancestors to bring us to this body right now. And so it's up to us to choose how to make that best use of our time.
I love this. And you made a great point about feeling free to explore your, comfort zone and venture out
Hmm.
of it, but without somebody else's rules. So that free
Mhm.
will, I'm going to bring it back because I think when I was setting
Yeah.
up our conversation, I was thinking about how can we turn play to be a concept that we introduce into the workplace as part of the everyday experience.
Yeah.
We've all been part, and I say we all because I feel like everyone's experienced this in high school and in the workplace, where some people feel more entitled to their rules of play, but they want to cross some boundaries and normalize it. Oh, that's just banter. Oh, that's just
Yeah, so
play.
that's
Yeah.
absolutely
Mhm.
not true play. That's what Eric Byrne would call gameplay, which
Mhm.
is a manipulation of people. And, you know, we all project on other people
Yes.
all the time. If we accept that, then let's, again, just have this pocket mirror just
Mhm.
here facing there. And if we know we're projecting all the time, we can also choose to look and see what have we just said and how have we said it and how has that actually affected somebody? You know, and what needs of mine are not getting met. But I know this is really sophisticated and difficult because if we look at our brains, you know, this amygdala, this is what keeps all the mammals together. And we have this thing called the prefrontal cortex. But there are days, because I spend a lot of time coaching from home, but also, you know, working with clients in person. But when I'm at home, I'll take a break and I will just say to the ether, as well as my husband in the house, because he works from home too, as I'd say, what value does this prefrontal cortex give us exactly? I'm not really sure because, you know, typically we have meetings here, right,
Mhm.
with our inner chimp, or I think in Russian it's the crocodile, is it, or Polish, you know,
The reptilian brain.
yeah, the reptilian brain, right? So what is this prefrontal cortex doing? And it's very difficult. It's like we have to earn our right to use this
Mhm.
instrument. We have to practice it, and it's difficult. But if we accept that, then we understand that it's difficult for everybody, and the effort is just well worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And some people just take more time to access their right to be more enlightened, I would say. Not even educated. This isn't even about education. This is about finding your inner light, finding your inner state of play, and wanting to remain as much there as possible. Because there is a struggle. Like some days you just want to be more primitive. You want to react. You want to
Yeah.
put
Well,
things
and
into existence.
yeah, and so just going back to where maybe many of us start with play at work, and that's where I started as well, is you know, love what you do.
Mhm.
It's what you've got already. What can we do? So if the workday is a bit onerous or soul sapping, then what I used to do is schedule a lunchtime, because lunchtime, no matter what happens, hopefully for you, is still a break for you, no matter what you say. So if it's not an hour, it's half an hour. So you could choose to book some time for a video call with a friend because there's someone you love to talk to, but they're remote. Or maybe you can text them in the morning and arrange for lunch. And that's what I would do. Even if it was like a half hour walk to go get lunch, leave the office, meet a friend, and then we walk back together. It just reminded me of what it is to be human, that
Mm,
connection, that heart to heart. It keeps us sane. And it means that when we go home to our families, we don't end up projecting all the toxicity that we've mopped up throughout the
yes,
day, because we are relational creatures and there's nothing we can do about that. We are in the same flower bed or the same garden. So that's certainly
absolutely.
one of the ways to do it. And just find work that you can find work that you enjoy. So in some ways, it's like being more mouse as your spirit animal, which I understand it to be is that mice focus on the micro detail.
Mhm.
Because if they didn't, they'd be paralyzed from the fear of worrying about whether or not a hawk in the middle of London is going to come and snaffle them, right?
Yeah.
They don't know, the chances are slim. So they focus on details. And what I mean by that is stay in your comfort zone. Find a piece of work that you know needs doing, that adds value to your team and your organization, and then do it really well. I mean, stick to the timescales if that's what's needed and committed to, but do it to the best of your ability. You know, that got me through school. That got me through, you know, the elephant graveyard. And you are recharging and restore yourself. And of course, when you've done that great work, you've got all these great examples then that you could cite for the next job you're looking for at the interviews.
And if you think about it, that's alchemy. You're taking these emotions that are a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit heavy, and you're channeling them into creating something. Doesn't mean that you're dissociating, that you're not focusing on them. You're understanding, oh, this colleague triggered me, or this task is a little bit more stressful. So I'm going to take it one line at a time, one emotion at a time, and process
Yeah.
it. But there's something that you mentioned about our ancestors, and I think there's a study that the trauma within us goes 7 generations back. So we might be processing emotions that have been stored in our family line for 7 generations. And when
Yeah.
you think about your colleagues, they're doing the same work. And if they
Yeah.
haven't had the time to actually sit with themselves and meditate, it's a little bit more challenging to them than it is to you if you've done some of the work. Which takes me to very beautiful concept called systemic constellations. And it's more than a concept, it's a philosophy, really. And a really beautiful quote that I came across while I was researching it: a living system is defined not by the individual parts, but by the relationships between them, the flow of energy, the flow of love. And I know that you infuse your work with systemic constellations. Can you tell us more about it and how it feels like this should be the future of work or the future of living, really, side by side, more connected?
Yeah, sure. So I coach leaders to transform the world through the science and magic of play. And that play alchemy that I've stumbled upon, I haven't invented it. In many ways, it's something I've discovered or downloaded. And it's the combination of play science and magic with systemic constellations. And it's the idea that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, you know? And doing this quantum work of reconnecting ourselves. And when we feel a grounded sense of belonging, and when we are able to acknowledge everything that has come before us, behind us, and where we come from, then we are in a much better place to move forward and live the life that we want to lead in this lifetime.
Mhm. And we get to rewrite the story as well, especially if, we came from a family that constantly moved abroad. So you have that sense of, oh, I need to move. I need to, I can never settle down. You get to break that cycle with your family if you feel that the universe is calling you to set your roots in a particular garden or in a particular space where you want to build a brand new flower bed, as to continue the flower metaphors that we're using in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with systemic constellations or family constellations, it was discovered by a German doctor called Bert Hellinger. And he was effectively a Christian of sorts, but he went to visit the Zulu people. And he discovered there were certain principles, guiding principles of the way they lived. And that's not to say they didn't have wars and difficulties and challenges and famines, but that he identified some principles like respecting your elders, recognizing who arrived in the system first,
Mhm.
maintaining a balance of exchange so we don't overgive and overtake. And those things are really very important. And when we start introducing those ways of being into the workplace through the behaviors of ourselves, and we start articulating these things, we're able to transmute the environment around us. Because as your quote says there, it's all relational. So it's a bit like we're all part of the spider web. And actually, maybe we're the spiders on the spider web. So when one spider moves, the web will move elsewhere. And
Yes.
so they change positions as well. And I never thought this would happen. But as I undertook a lot of self-work with my own birth family, I realized, and I didn't ever really believe it was possible, I hoped it would be, that in doing my own self-work, I was able to change my relationship with them.
Mhm.
And by working on myself, I was better able to receive and boundary the projections that were put on me. And in return, I was able to really recognize, well, what's me and what's not me? You know, does this belong to me or does it belong somewhere else? And there's no judgment because we all have our own burden to carry.
Absolutely, yeah. We all have our blessings and our burdens. And I think while you were talking and you were explaining how you were clearing some of the projections that didn't really match as to who you were, they were just
Mhm.
projected from outside sources. If you look at the image here, every person has their energetic field. And when they don't know who they are, they allow projections to fill that field and define their
Yes.
story for them. But when they do that in their work, they clear everything that doesn't belong to who they are. They redefine their story, their authenticity, and they're better able to share who they are and start these more meaningful connections. And I think for those that are doing more of the work, they're seeing the results. But there is a challenge because what you mentioned is very valid. We should honor those that came before us in the system, people that are living here right now, today, or our ancestors that have
Hmm.
changed the story for us. But what if we meet someone in the workplace who's much older than us with more experience
Mhm.
and they have done less of the work? That is the crucial work of finding who they are. So they are kind of like walking projection towers and it's almost a challenge to communicate with them because you cannot really have that connected experience with them. What would you advise people if they experience something like that?
Yeah. So I don't usually give advice, but I'm happy to share how I would approach it. And then hopefully your listeners will take what's useful and leave behind what's not. Um, I turned 49 this year, incredibly. And I'm very excited about that. I'm fast reaching an elder that you speak of, and what is time, what
Far
is age?
from it.
And what is age but time passing, and what I would say is to ask ourselves, what is it that triggers us? What happens when we are with someone like this? What is it that annoys us about them and all of this? And then turn that mirror back to us, because at the end of the day, it's not just, it's a two-way thing, but the only thing we can be in control of is ourselves. It's very easy, I think, that when we do a lot of the self-work, we get tempted into adopting a stance of superiority complex, they call it in psychology, right? To be superior because we've done more work. And this is the different thing. This is not school, this is not work. You don't, just because you got an A+ for your homework on spirituality and someone hasn't even revised yet or opened a book, right? Because they've got other challenges or other past trauma that they have not been able to look at. It doesn't make one bigger than the other. And this is the key thing with systemic constellations. It's like when in order to understand where we are and our belonging, we need to recognize that we are the little ones to the big ones behind us. So this is a very common entanglement. So many adults grow up in difficult situations where they have become bigger than their parents, and their parents become the little one.
Mhm.
And love cannot flow in that direction, because in a system, it's the big ones that give to the little ones.
Yes.
The big ones give, and the little ones take, and then they pass on that gift of life. So that was a really crucial lesson for me to learn, because what I realized when I started seeing this was it was arrogance in me, and so now I understand when people say, oh, you're such a young whippersnapper, and they start excluding me in things. They didn't like my enthusiasm. I had too much
Mhm.
energy. I had all of this. And it was really frustrating because I just wanted to run around like a young lioness on the Pridelands, and play and make the world a better place. So, in spite of my numerical age, I think I will always be a millennial.
Mhm.
To me, it's not a big deal. That is the way that I've chosen to be, right? But not everyone has that. And I think when we can quietly acknowledge in our hearts to say, maybe to an elder that you've met, that maybe they don't even know how to, I don't know, connect with someone in less than 1 second on LinkedIn because they don't know where to click on that thing to find the darn QR code. What would I do? I'd say, wow, I remember it was 3 months ago that I first discovered that feature. So why wouldn't I share that with them? And people are so grateful. And whenever I do that in the social setting, I always name when I learned that, because then they know I only learned it a week ago because someone else was generous enough to share that with me. And that's the cycle of life. I love and I know, like in Star Wars and Jedi speak, it's like we call them the younglings, right? And I feel like a youngling too. I feel both. We are all of these things. And I think this is the thing, like when we have younglings, when you have young people, when you have millennials, children in the mix, they remind us of our purpose. So the more we actually hang out with our elders, the more we share the gift of energy and of life that they made possible, and very often these difficult, maybe so-called more experienced, biologically older people in organizations, the organization might not be there had they not done the work that was needed. So if you joined after, then it's useful to acknowledge this. If it's difficult to accept it, don't accept it. Stay in your comfort zone. Don't accept it. But nonetheless, on a piece of paper, if there was like a Magna Carta, that something was written down, call it the Akashic Records, whatever it is, somewhere it's noted that this difficult person to you arrived in the system before you. That's simply a fact. And if we were able to acknowledge that, then we're able to move forward without false humility. Yeah,
absolutely. And while you were talking, because I was simultaneously listening to you and trying to figure out the root of the question, because I'm remembering a colleague that kind of
wonderful
triggered some memories. And the message that I received just now wasn't what I expected. It was because this person was twice my age, and I looked up to him as a source of guidance.
Yeah.
But instead, it was a reverse role. It was like I was the teacher and he was the student. And I just received the message, well, why can't you play with me? But that's the thing, when we join the workforce, especially when we're younger, we just want to prove ourselves. We want to work. We want to supply the economy, but not in the a bad way. We just want to channel our potential. Whereas some of the people that have been in those systems, they want to play, and they want that fresh energy to play. Whereas I think sometimes we reverse psychology our whole societies because we've missed on the opportunity to have a proper childhood, and so different people experience that return back to the inner child at different ages. So you might think that you're dealing with somebody who's an executive, but in their own little world, they're returning back to their childhood because finally they have the time to play. So it's an interesting way to look at that mirror back to you and think, why is this happening to me right now?
Yeah.
Powerful reframe.
Is it okay if we just play with that a little, Stella?
Yes,
Because it's
let's do
one concrete example. So if I understand correctly, in that scenario, you became the big one, became the little one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you also talked about this need to prove and contribute. And they're all good things because for us to belong, we need to feel worthy that we're taking something from the village store.
Yes.
So we have to contribute. So those are all noble and evolutionary sound things. What I find is that very often there are entanglements. So if we are very passionate about finding our place in the world, dedicating ourselves to great causes, it's worth noting that a workplace is not our family. Our colleagues will never be our family. And the truth is, the organizations, our employers, that is a different kind of contract. Right? It's a social contract, which involves a balance of exchange where the employer pays you some money and you are equal sized and you would offer some service, and then that will be a handshake, and that is an agreement. Right? So it's up to us to then defend our boundaries and look after ourselves. They didn't ask you to give their life. No matter if they're buying you pizza, allowing you to sleep under the desk with your sleeping bag, let your family come in and eat as much food. We can receive that as generosity, but there is still a balance of exchange, and also responsibility. So to recognize that our bosses aren't our parents. I know that wasn't the case for you, but to recognize that what we're looking for, maybe what we're looking for in our parents that maybe once upon a time absent, because it was certainly for me, it was so difficult when I started the world of work because I didn't realize why, the managers weren't enabling me to do something that would help them. It just made no sense to me. And of course, now I know that I was just projecting my need of having my needs met, which weren't, sadly, as a child. And that's not uncommon because we're all different and we're all unique. But recognizing that and disentangling that. So one of the things I love doing when I learned about systemic constellations is before I have a meeting with somebody, and if I know that it's a challenging thing, and I know that we're both working towards the same goal to get something done, I'll just say to myself, I I might find a stuffed toy or a cushion or an object, and I might say to them, let's take my new toy here, beautiful conch that was vacated. I'm learning how to play it. I might say to the object, I might say something like, hey, Ricky, you're not my father. I'm not your daughter. I'm not your wife. Because you might be projecting certain things on you, you know? And I'll just say, we are just colleagues. We are not family. And I have come here to work with you so that we can achieve our common goals, you know? And I say that from my heart. It's not a role play. I don't pretend, because my body will not buy it if it's
You're
BS.
setting the intentions as well. You're clearing the air, setting the intentions.
And when I say that, I might still hear my inner critical, whatever ego, you call it whatever you want. It's still going, oh, but Ricky stabbed me in the back just last Friday. How can we possibly go into the meeting with this? You call it the inner child. It's just like, well, but once you see this distance, you've externalized this part of you that finds it difficult. And it's amazing what happens next, because you could choose then to open the meeting with, hey, Ricky, let's do it. Let's tell me something that's happened to you this morning that I can help with. Then all of a sudden you're able to open your heart, but you can do it safely because you've boundaried and protected yourself. And that's what
yourself from that entanglement.
Yeah, exactly. And you take ownership and responsibility. And isn't that what becoming an adult is all about?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think it's multi-complex as well, because some days you'll be the one that is in the role of the child, and you're going to be healing some of the aspects that you couldn't, experience when you were a child. Some days you're going to be the teacher, and it's every day the roles are going to shift. So you need to be open-minded to receive what the guidance is.
Yeah.
And if you think about us being souls who have lived many lifetimes, what if we're just repeating some of the cycles with people that we used to play with?
Yeah.
Which is a wider concept that not many people can explore without skepticism. But it's worth noting. Maybe we're meeting people that we used to play with, which is why some connections are a little bit more entangled, because we have more energetic links to them.
And it's funny as well, I think roles are very tricky things. They're sort of labels. And I constantly check if I'm maintaining the size I am in a relationship, just staying same sized with people rather than thinking about who's a teacher and who's a student, because the power dynamics of what those words trigger in me is massive. And I remember when I first met my meditation guru, and she's 10 years younger than me. And she said to me, "You're my Agile guru." And I was like, oh, I don't feel comfortable with that. This term guru, it seems to make one bigger and one lesser than. I'm not into that sort of thing. And she said, well, for me, guru is someone I can learn from. And I was like, okay, then I can accept that. Again, it's just really wonderful just to talk about, hey, I don't feel comfortable. So then that's how, I accept that she calls me her Agile guru, and I call her my meditation guru. And it's ever such a wonderful thing to honor each other's gifts.
Absolutely. And you've made, once again, a powerful reframe. We need to look at other people, regardless of their age, their title, people that we can learn from, but also people that we can play with, to bring us back to this conversation. Because I think this is where I've maybe ignored some of the science of the universe, where I've wanted to learn so much from people. I've stopped myself from playing with them. But I think this is where the responsibility comes into the picture, where I feel like I need to have my boundaries quite clear. And so if somebody crosses those boundaries, to me, it's not play anymore. It's needing to protect.
That's so. And I think, Stella, you have such an open heart and longing to play with everyone, to bring about universal healing. But the truth is, if you were in a playground, you wouldn't necessarily make friends with everybody.
Yes.
Now, if someone fell over and hurt their knee, you're not going to spit on their knee unless it's really the only disinfectant you can figure out. I can't imagine that. But you might go get the teacher or go get help or administer first aid, even if they're not your friend. And I think that's the key thing, because I think we raise children, and I've been raised to make friends with everybody.
Be kind, be nice, be a good girl.
I'm like, how can I do that if that person just stabbed me with a pencil before break time and did it with a smile? That again, that's just a way of re-entangling our emotions and how we're defending ourselves. If we felt a need to move arm away, or if we felt the need to punch them in order to defend ourselves,
Mhm.
that's a healthy reaction. I'm not saying follow through,
Yeah.
but to acknowledge that. And I think the key thing is to recognize that not everyone will be a friend, and that's okay, because that's
That's
about
okay. Yeah.
discernment. And I certainly don't play with everybody. And I think with actually, you can play with people, but not everyone might be a friend. And I would also say, in terms of teachers that I learn from, I think what I find myself doing now is when I travel with them, it's just we're companions, and they have something that I'd like to learn about. But I also know that if you drink from a fountain that is polluted, that will ultimately give you a tummy ache.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
in the end, I find myself, and this was like a voice that just came up from my fountain, which was, the time has come for our ways to part.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know, thank you for the gift you've given me. This isn't a conversation I have with them. It's just, I noticed this come up and I'm like,
It's intuitive.
yeah, it's like there's no notion of, they've been difficult or they're not practicing their work. It's like,
Your
well,
fountain is polluted.
yeah, exactly, because we're trying to constantly clean our
Mhm.
fountain. But if we spout the snakes and
Mhm.
scorpions that come out in order to do that, then we're just adding to the pollution in the world, aren't we? But
Yeah.
it's very difficult, Stella, to
It
stay
is. Yeah.
mindful is an important practice, and play helps with that. Yeah.
It's self-mastery, but I think allowing ourselves to see ourselves as part of a bigger system. I think the example that you used, a playground, if you think about the world as an open playground, we're not defined by our city or our country or our school or our workplace. It's an open playground. And if you don't like the game that is currently played, or you don't like the group that you're with because noticed that they're cheating, they're not following the rules, or there's
Mm.
something about them that just doesn't feel easy with you, doesn't feel right with you can take a step aside and join a different group, or explore and look at what's happening around you, what's happening in different parts of this playground. And I think this is where a lot of people get stuck and they block their own flow of love because they think this is where I need to be, this is who I need to be loyal to. And they don't realize they need to be loyal to themselves first, because if you abandon yourself,
Yeah.
that light that is shining around you, it starts to flicker, it starts to dim, and we need everybody's light for us to be able to see what's happening around us, for us to be able to appreciate each other's authenticity and channel and explore our potential.
Yeah. And I just
Which
wanted to go ahead. It's your game, Stella.
which takes me to a book that you wrote, The Dream Team Nightmare, the
Yeah.
first ever agile single player role playing game where you determine the outcome of the story. And I would love to continue our conversation with this book and how it came to life and how you've seen adults change the narrative in their own lives.
Yeah, so this is inspired by the American series of Choose Your Own Adventures
Mhm.
book series, but also the English version, Fighting Fantasy. Um, and I just love the idea that you could determine the ending based on the choices you make. So there are 8 possible endings in this. And it came at a time, funny enough, when I wanted to contribute, and I wasn't sure if I'd be able to create a family of my own. So I took this energy and thought, if creation is what my heart longs for, then how am I going to create? What do I create? So I wanted to kind of bottle
Mhm.
my hard-earned, hard-won experience in doing transformational change in organizations. So you get to play the role of an agile coach. You have 7 days to save a team that's going to be outsourced, and and they're designing a dating app, so it's really a bit of fun.
Emotionally charged.
Yeah, and people tell me they buy it and take it on the airplane, and they've read through all of it by the time they land, and they really enjoy it. And that was the key thing for me, right? So things that we transmit in the world, I feel like it has to be of service if it comes from me, and that I've done my own work. So it was very difficult in many ways to write this book, because I could hear my inner critic, my experiences. But once things started flowing, and this is to the writers and dreamers out there, the characters just started talking in my head. And it was very simple, because it's like, well, what would Joey say about this? What would Jackie say? And these are the characters would just start moving. The chess pieces on the board would start moving themselves. And then I simply nourished it with my experiences. And then the story would come out. And the other thing is, readers say, were you spying on my company? Were you part of my team? Because I don't remember you being there, but this so encapsulates our experience. So again, it reminds me of what you said, which is we exist in this web of life, and we're all interrelated, you know. So this is a different way of how we can go about work. And there's some really fun activities in there as well.
It looks exciting, and I think anyone that's been part of a team, whether at university or even school or in the workplace, you're going to have different people with different strengths and different weaknesses, and they're going to try to mask their weaknesses because they're not going to think that allowing for their weaknesses to be seen makes them worthy of love, which is the deepest primal drive for us to belong. Is we want to be loved, we want to be appreciated, we want to be seen, and we want to hide our imperfections. Whereas our imperfections actually make us relatable. They make us authentic. They make us beautiful in the sense that they show to the world where we can grow, and therefore we are attracting people that can help us grow in those areas.
And absolutely. And I think it's a really great test of how much safety you're able to emanate and create is how vulnerable, how willing people are to be vulnerable with you. And I find that if people aren't and they're hiding stuff, then that tells me that there's a little bit more of self-work I can do to make them feel safe, you know. An example of this, over the weekend, I was facilitating, I say I was facilitating, but like as though it were work, but it was truly play. I was hosting, let's call it a Percy Jackson weekend for my daughter and her friends. And we were just labeling some items of the different foods, like, you know, nectar of the gods, that would be fancy, you know, and that sort of thing. And I laid out the little plaques and people brought snacks. And I said, well, would you like to name your snack? And one of the girls, she took a pen, but actually she took ages to even pick up a pen and then the plaque. And what I realized is I stayed with her instead of just chivying her on because I wanted to move on to the next thing. I just suggested a few ideas, but then I was just quiet. I was like, okay, let's just see what happens next. And then slowly, she says a few things. And then she very slowly writes it down. And then she says, oh, but I don't think I've spelt this right. And I was like, oh, that's what it was. That she wanted to be sure that she'd spelt it right. But, you know, she didn't realize she could ask, you know. And I was like, oh, that's what it was. And it was just so useful to be able to catch these really tender moments, especially with our colleagues as well. And perhaps those who've been around for a long time, that perhaps they don't know how to use the new system. Well, why would they, you know, and vice versa.
I think it's not even just about that. I think what you mentioned is it's valid, but it's also about many people are acting out of their coping mechanisms because they're used to the criticism. They're used to people being impatient with them.
Yeah.
When you do that in our work, you embody more of a different state, which is more patience, more grace, more faith, more hope.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not used to seeing that. So they're acting from that reserved space. They're acting from, oh, this person is going to shout at me because everybody, it's that core belief. Everybody shouts at me.
Well, and
Everybody
that's the core
ignores me.
experience. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the people that do the work, there is a heightened sense of responsibility because you get to be the example of something different. So people might project to you initially because they're expecting the worst from you, not because of who you are, but because of their own experiences of kind of always being hit with people's negativity. So, oh, that was an interesting, you know, turn of, you know, everybody is capable of getting better at being themselves, meaning unlocking more of that ease to channel their authenticity. I think every conversation I've had so far, it comes back to authenticity and it comes back to allowing ourselves to just be who we are. And these team bonding exercises are precisely about that, allowing ourselves to be seen for who we are, which is the key to increasing that productivity at work because we're not hiding, we're not running away from things, we're just allowing ourselves to be.
Yeah. And if we were to assume that it is a safe place at work for you to do this, and it's still impossible or difficult to do it, then I would find a social setting like a club or a passion. So if you're into crocheting, then maybe just join a crochet club. If you're into archery, do that. But find something that you enjoy doing and start connecting with those people. And then as you're able to share a bit more of yourself in that context, where it's playful and you feel safe, then it's much easier to start opening up at work as well.
Absolutely. And that takes me to, what is playful leadership for the people that hold the big responsibilities in the office, the executive roles, the founders? How can they introduce playful leadership in a way that preserves their image of responsible and authoritarian leaders that know what they're doing?
Yeah, so I define playful leadership as a leader's ability to enable flow of
Hmm.
value in a system. And it depends on their relationship with play. And one of the things that I discovered that as I was working with adults, because historically I haven't worked with children yet, so working with like thousands of adults, is that I started watching what they do, their roles, their responsibilities, and things like that. And I noticed 5 key attributes. So did you know that playful leaders are resourceful, responsible, respectful, resilient, and real, as an authentic, like you mentioned, like the Velveteen Rabbit who wants to become a real
Hmm.
rabbit to the little boy that they love. And when I started seeing this, I was like, how is it possible that these 5 R's would be associated with play? It made no sense to me. But I saw this behavior at a very wonderful counterplay conference in Denmark, and I was like, okay, well, let's try it. It's just a model. It's a filter through which I will see the world, and let's test it. And at about that time, my daughter was 4 years old. So I started looking at what she was doing and going about life with this lens. And I was like, oh, it's true. This is the way she's making these decisions. Now, how are the children doing this? Because that's weird. You never think about a child at 3 or 4 being responsible, but
Hmm.
the outcome is. So why has Janie not punched? There's a lot of punching, isn't there? But that's a way of communicating too. Not advised, of course, as adults, but or young people. Why has she not taken Rebecca's toy, even though she really wants it? And why does she choose to ask for it and then wait? And that was the mystery for me. And it turns out that play has a life cycle,
Hmm.
And do you think this would be interesting to your listeners? You tell me, Stella.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And as
Yeah.
you're talking, I'm thinking that children usually mimic their parents. So the more the parent is that responsible but playful leader at home, because they're also that at work,
Oh,
there's
wonderful.
alignment. There's alignment between the two roles that they play in society, at work, at home.
Oh,
And
yes.
yeah,
Absolutely. It's
children
like
just feel more wholesome.
2 concentric circles, isn't it? Overlapping. And then you've
Absolutely.
got
Yeah.
the subset in the middle, which is us. We're the only ones who are common to all the situations we find ourselves in. Darn it.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that, play has a life cycle, and what we're trying to do is once we get into play flow, after play has started, we want to stay in it. It's the flow that, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talks about. And because we want to get into that flow and we feel good, we want to stay in it. The children know this. Children exist to play and grow, right? Because we have bodies because it's all about movement. And so they want to stay in flow. So they want to play for as long as possible. So healthy children will know that snatching that toy is going to put an end to something.
Hmm.
Whereas they could quite happily wander off and then come back for when it's needed. And they're just constantly trying to flow. And that's what helps them regulate and be, resourceful and responsible and respectful.
There's that keyword, regulate. If you grew up in a household where stress was the norm, a
Yeah.
regulated nervous system is going to feel foreign. Therefore, you're going to want to break that flow as soon as you get there because it's going to scare you. And this is an experience that adults experience in relationships, where a relationship, when it's healthy, it's normal, it's calm. You're like, oh, that's boring. I need the excitement. I need the
Right.
adrenaline.
Yeah.
And this is kind of like replicated in the workplace, it's replicated in society, which is why we see these protests and we see the wars. The collective nervous system, it wants to remain in a state of stress because it's been stressed for so long. It doesn't know how to rest and remain in that peace and that flow.
Yeah. I mean, I think also there is proof that our bodies, when given a chance, so when we feed our bodies healthy food, seemingly magical things will happen, like, you know,
Mhm.
our aches and pains will go away, the body will heal, you know, our organs are replaced in their entirety from, you know, new cells over a matter of days, months, or whatever. And so I think the collective, if given the chance and the right
Mhm.
environment, will try to heal, and the body is constantly trying to do that. Again, I didn't believe that until I started doing systemic constellations. And so, you know, through the work I do, you know, menopause is no longer such a challenging thing. And I realized that actually when we have difficulties in life, it can trigger all the unwellness and all the difficulties you've carried all your life. And then we have a choice to make, right? We can either look at ourselves,
Mhm.
stop and fix, and then move on so that we have a different outcome and ending, or we can choose to stay stuck. But I just want to say both of those choices are valid. It just might not be the right time yet, you
Yeah.
know?
And they're all learning experiences, which is why failure doesn't really exist. It's just you failed an experiment. You
Yeah.
failed an attempt. Doesn't mean that you failed as a whole. Everything is a learning experience. A painful relationship is just as much an experience as a healthy, loving relationship. It's
And
just you're learning.
absolutely. And I just think with the Playful Leadership on my programs and my courses, it's all about not just reframing, but people genuinely recognizing what they thought was a weakness um, is a foundation for strength. Right?
Mm.
It's much more than that. And if we look at children, I mean, the word failure, it's the adults who introduce the word
Yes.
failure into the vocabulary. That doesn't exist for children. They make many attempts trying to walk.
Yeah. And they're still excited.
Yeah, and they're just like, okay. So I think when you create that kind of environment where it's free of judgment, I mean, critical analysis, I'm all for it, but
Mhm.
it's that kind of snidey, not useful judgment that puts people down. How can that, you know, help a plant grow? You know, telling a plant that it's a failure.
Yes. Grow faster.
Um,
How dare
yeah,
you?
I mean, that's just you getting frustrated at your own stuff. And I think that's what we need to create a healthy environment for ourselves first, and then that will emanate wherever we go.
Beautiful. I think it comes back to ourselves ultimately. We can be role models for other people, but it comes back to us. And I think this is how play can transform a life, because it's not just about introducing play in the workplace. It's introducing play across every aspect of your life with the idea that you want to be more of yourself. You want to be more grounded, you want to be more balanced, you want to be more joyful, but it comes back to you. Everything that you experience throughout the day, you bring it back to you so that you can integrate that and then channel it back into the world so that you can be this open channel that is constantly connected to everyone and everything, even the trees, even the animals. They're all living beings, living creatures that are part of the playground, just in different ways. Do you see one aspect of society that can really, really use play at the moment?
Um, so I think in particular for me, my heart goes out to the millennials. I feel like, you know, they're the future change makers. And in my work, I'm really finding ways of supporting them in the service of my life, because obviously they're going to outlive me, which is the right thing, and they'll be able to carry on the change. And I think if we can bring true play, that's safe play, fair play, and being good sport, and all the different sort of play science notions behind it and what leadership really is, which, by the way, children know what leadership is. They know what sharing is, because if they know what, no one wants to be without their share of the pie,
Hmm.
because otherwise they'll quickly learn that they don't get invited to a party, right? You know?
Or,
Um,
or, or they stay hungry.
yeah, exactly. Or maybe they didn't like pie, so they give it away. But
Mm.
I think this is the thing. If we're able to reconnect with our playful selves, we have access to resources that not only allow us to heal, but give us the resources to move forward and become the person we've always known and wanted to be. So I think certainly the millennials, but also I would say people in the later part of their career where they might have 5 or 6 years left before their retirement. But, you know, I think retirement again is a very artificial construct
Mhm.
that suits society. I mean, if you love something, you're going to do it forever, presumably, which is
Yes.
what a lot of the famous composers are known to do and writers. So I think, you know, playing really changing your game when you get to a point in your career where you have great influence and giving back and supporting the next generation, but then exiting a work system and leaving a legacy that will flourish. I think that's a magnificent thing. So that's what I do as well with more mature leaders who wish to do that.
And I think now that you're talking, the best play happens when you're honest. You're honest that you're liking it, you're enjoying it, you want to learn from it. And when people learn how to be more honest, they're naturally inviting that play, that flow into their life because they're in alignment with what feels right with them. Because if you're suppressing something, if you're not being honest with yourself, you're not being honest with the world to some
Mm.
degree. So, honesty really is a core value that society, regardless of the age, regardless of the industry, needs to prioritize. Again, I think just being
Yeah.
honest, speaking the truth, just expressing what needs to come out.
Yes. And that's wonderful that you're so values driven. And again, that's something we can exercise ourselves. So practice being honest with ourselves. And if we find that's challenging, then, maybe practice on, well, how do I make myself feel safe enough
Mhm.
to really even think about the word honesty and spell it. And I think ultimately what I've discovered is that with my workshops and courses, which this was not something I expected, it was just something that emerged, was that the people who come, the transformation, we'd be together for the first morning out of 3 days, and a participant would say to me, I've done more work here in the last 3 hours than it would take 7 months for my therapist to do. Now, I want to be clear to your listeners that I'm not a therapist. I don't offer therapy. I'm a trained professional coach. I also do systemic constellations. But it is therapeutic and cathartic, like you say, when we find ourselves in a place where actually we can just be us. We can
Mhm.
be me and we can be us, and that's okay. Then you can get off the start block in your game of life and you can move to the next step and the next step. And the next thing you know, you're metaphorically climbing the monkey bars that you thought you were too old to do. And, or it's impossible to do because, in one of my courses, the youngest participant was 27 and the oldest was 73. So, play travels across time and space
Yeah.
and barriers. And it was so wonderful to have that wealth of, humanity. And in the future, I want to run play conferences and events where we have, cross species play and dogs and maybe chickens and, in a safe way.
In a safe way, yeah. There's a valid point about. I think the system needs to acknowledge it has a problem. And by the system, I mean the way that we educate. And by default, that education is not just about the children, but also the professionals that then go out into the world and help others, such as doctors and therapists. They are largely trained and educated to continue to solve problems, not to give solutions so that you don't need them anymore, but to keep you at an optimal state where you can still perform. Wow, you can clear the wounds and the traumas for many years, which I think is a faulty model by default. We shouldn't promote carrying chronic diseases, whether they're internal or external, for many years. We should promote a different lifestyle that allows us to fully, you know, be who we can be. And I think it's a larger conversation, obviously, but when we
Yeah.
allow ourselves to feel play versus that burden of responsibility, I need to be the doctor, I need to save lives, I need to, there is that pressure that has been added that probably is affecting us negatively, even as we shape ourselves to be the professional that help others.
Yeah, and I just want to speak something about doctors and the NHS and the caring profession, which is when my own lens of seeing myself became different, um, and more compassionate and just more practical. And let's stop and look at what's happening here. I found myself surrounded, by doctors who invite me to say, okay, well, let's put a research paper together with the University of Buckinghamshire to see if we can have an alternative
Mhm.
way of supporting people who have non-medical depression. Because the GPs are saying to me, we don't want to prescribe them anything.
Yeah.
We know that won't help. And,
Mhm.
and you start meeting people like this. So I think that's the key thing. When we start talking about groups of people as just a single system, then it's really easy to label it as bad or good. And for me, that always makes me feel a bit hopeless. And it's so difficult to do. But when we find the few people we meet who also want to support each other and look at root causes and move forward, then I think that's how we change the world.
Yeah. And we're healing largely through conversations, through being open, through being honest and collaborating, which sometimes it doesn't even need the big research. It just needs us to get together, share our ideas, and something beautiful comes out from it. And I think this is kind of your role as a play alchemist. And I put the sorting hat, obviously. How would you define being a play alchemist to anyone that's listening and they're considering kind of changing their title or inviting more play and kind of being that playful leader and they think, I like this title?
Yeah. I think it's really important to think about why you're attracted to something and what it is you want to become and what's really underneath all of that seeking. You know, it's very easy to see a title you like, emulate it, and then hope for the best. You know, we're all on different journeys. And the reason I call myself the Play Alchemist is because it enables other people to find their gifts. You know, you found yours, I found mine, and ours will all be different. You know, we're not gingerbread people that can be mass manufactured, and we all need to do our own work. And so I just love to drop in a reference here of The Gene Keys by Richard Rudd, which is all about contemplation. And one way of doing our own work is by better understanding ourselves and our shadows and our gifts, and then transmuting that into something we can give back to the world. So that's the key thing. It's not about, for me, it's not about certificates to be X, Y, and Z, because you can get all these certificates, but at the end of the day, if you've not done your own work, then really for me, it's a receipt at best.
Yeah. And it goes to show that you can use creativity to create your own storyline, to change the narrative that society is giving you. Maybe society is giving you 5 options, but there are 5 more that you are meant to create, co-create with the universe. So just because there are 5 options in front of you doesn't mean that these are all the options. Because in reality, the options are limitless. You can customize your journey any way you want. You can
Oh,
be
I
more,
love that. Yes, you
be
can
more playful.
customize your own
Yeah,
journey because it's your journey.
exactly. Yeah. Releasing the expectations. And as an authenticity alchemist, I love to explore how our names show us our life path and how our natal birth chart kind of gives indication to the elements within us, which give us an indication as to how we're going to behave and what's going to be helpful and what environments we can benefit from and where do we really need to enter so that we can take some of the elements that are lacking within our own profile. So in your case, we have 4 letters, which isn't uncommon. It just means that you have more superpowers.
Right.
The first one is P, which relates to 7, which is the number of partnerships. So you're here to co-create with your soul tribe and with strategic partners. But this is a path that usually kind of guides you to meet with a lot of people, connect with a lot of people, and co-create with them, because that's the best way for you to channel your own potential. That's the first name, and it's kind of your path forward, just meeting people, collaborating, inviting them to play,
Okay.
and doing things together. Then we've got 2 middle names, as in the acronym. So S relates to leadership, so help others unlock their inner leader and channel their potential, because the middle path, the middle names, they're about kind of what we already are really good at, and we're
Yeah.
here to pass it on forward to other people. And 5, which is creativity, so immerse people in creative activities to activate their inner child.
Yeah.
5 is also the number of play. It's also the number of kind of education, as in
Mhm.
lower education, not the higher education just yet. So it has more of that
Mhm.
freedom in
Yeah,
it.
I love it.
And then we have resources as the final name, which is kind of how you're going to express yourself, how you're going to communicate to the world. This is your style,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's all about creating structures that bring innovation and changes to the status quo based on what's already in front of the final name. But all of that takes us to self growth, which is a
Okay.
path of constantly changing who you are, but not to change who you are, but rather to unlock more of yourself and integrate it. So you're always undergoing your personal evolution and kind of bringing different aspects of who you are in the different phases of your journey. So
Oh,
there's
this is so
alignment.
fun. It's like a little fortune cookie. I love it, Stella.
I love it. The podcast has not been defined like that just yet, but I love that. And then astrology gives us a little bit more information about the energy. So we have the 12 signs with the 12 houses. And once you know when you're born, exactly what time and what city, you can see which house. It's kind of like the sorting process of the sorting
Mhm.
hat, but it's different
Absolutely.
houses and
Yeah.
they're undergoing an alchemy. And then you have, ooh, we've got the four elements, but I'm not sure where the slide went. So never mind. We've got four elements, which is
Great.
earth is the grounding element. So it has more to do with the identity, with the habits, with the actions. We have air, which is the thinking, it's the ideas, it's you communicating. Water is the flow, it's the emotions, it's great
Mhm.
community leaders. They have a lot of water because they just connect with people. They don't need the words, they don't need the actions, they just need the presence. And finally, the fire signs, they're all about purpose. They're all about channeling these huge
Mhm.
ideas that shift the status quo. So, starting with the sun sign, which
Mhm.
for some reason I thought you were a water sign. I don't know why. Maybe this was the universe guiding me to use more water in the interpretation, which is more playfulness, more empathy, more joy. But
Uh-huh.
anyway, you are absolutely a Virgo in terms of your sun sign, and it's a grounding sign. It has it's the sixth sign, so self growth, which is very much in alignment with the path, and it has a lot of action. It's action driven, but it's action driven so that you can benefit society, so that you can
Mm.
boost your personal growth to the next level. Moon sign Capricorn, so that existing identity of the high performer that is extremely successful, because
Mhm.
Capricorns, they are the hardest working signs and they get a lot of things done. They're very much primed for success as the 10th house.
Hmm.
So you're shifting from success mindset to play mindset, abundance mindset in a different way where it's a little bit more balanced.
Mhm.
South Node Taurus. So the three major signs to begin with, all the earth signs here. So existing knowledge with Taurus gives me an indication that you already know what it means to kind of manifest, to use this big word, great ideas into great products, whether it's books, whether it's podcasts, whether it's schools. You are the founder of the School of Play, which is something that we haven't introduced in the podcast conversation just yet, but you know how to turn that inner knowledge into something that others can engage with, something that they can take home with themselves. And so your South Node helps you pass on that knowledge to other people to help them ground their ideas and develop their products. And North Node, there is the water sign, which is you're here to be in more of a flow state so that you can fulfill your learning path and soul purpose. And that equips you to kind of bring those actions more in alignment with that flow versus just rigid to-do list, which is more the Capricorn. I say that because I'm a Capricorn.
Mhm.
But you have that flow that is allowing you to maybe zoom out of the tasks when you need to in order to preserve that flow. So it's more balanced. Rising sign, which comes when we have the exact time of birth. So there is a mystery here because we don't know exactly which is the rising sign.
Mhm.
Meaning that maybe this is your alchemy. Maybe you get to tap into all the four elements and bring a different energy in order for you to bring those resources and connect to as many people as possible. I found that in my conversations in Born to Do It, when there is a mystery, it just means that there's more fluidity in it. There's more flexibility in it, and everything is happening for a reason in terms of the knowledge that we're unlocking. Finally, the Venus sign is Leo, so that's kind of your love language, how you're connecting with
Mhm.
people. And Leo is a playful sign, it's fire sign, so spirituality, but more to do with that purpose, that passion. So you're connecting with people based on who speaks the language of passion. Are they passionate about ideas? Are they passionate about changing the world? Are they passionate about discovery? Great, let's play together, let's work together. Which brings us to a final kind of sum up. Life path 7, which is the first path with the sun sign and the north node. You're here to be that transformational leader and bring that transformational leadership, meaning embrace the wonders of leading others, but co-create amazing structures together as you shift the status quo for the better, because there is an inherent leadership in you but you're meant to bring that into the partnerships, which is the seven, which is kind of the umbrella that is moving you in the direction of your North Star.
Mm.
Then with the middle paths, 1 and 5, the superpowers of leadership and creativity, you're here to bring that ability to visualize how to ground those ideas into playful creative building. So let yourself get immersed in the creative process of structure building as you help others unlock their inner leaders, meaning once they've been activated, once they see a way that they can ground their ideas, you just play together. It's like Lego building.
Mhm.
Because you are so good at seeing the structure from the pieces to the final structure, you can help and guide others and empower them. Hey, did you know that you can build a house? Did you know that you can build a boat? And you start playing together. And finally, with the rising sign and Venus sign, with Leo, path 4, it's all about metaphysical resources. Bring play into the everyday of people as you channel your ideas into products and services to uplift humanity. Because I like to leave Leo as the fire sign that kind of uplifts the energy, and it connects them to more of their true, authentic, spiritual self that is more than just their storyline on earth, because we have that limitless potential within us. I've done a lot of talking. How do you find this illustration of your inner world mapped out in front of you?
Oh, well, first of all, I want to thank you, Stella. What a gift of love this is, and the effort that you put into it. But of course, it felt effortless from what I can tell with your big smile because you're having so much fun. And
I am
that's
having
part
fun.
of it, isn't it? When we do what we enjoy, we get more of what we want done, and it feels effortless. Yeah, I think it feels very spot on, which is interesting, isn't it?
Which is interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely play. I think every resource that we find, personality tests, numerology, human design, they're
Mm,
just tools that allow us to channel more of our potential and turn that self-discovery journey to more of a playful experience. Because to me, this is play, as you mentioned, and I love the colors. I love playing with that, but I also love that there is information that can be conveyed in conversations like that and in using resources like that. I think anyone that's ever attempted to make a personality quiz,
mhm.
they love helping people get to know
Oh,
who they are. And I think this is at the core of this. And I would love to be able to bring people to more of their potential, but also to the understanding that there's always more to them. And they should not be afraid to look within, because there is such great fountain of wisdom and of love and potential that is waiting for them to explore. And when they do that, they can channel more of that self discovery out into the world. And I think with play alchemists like yourself, the world becomes a more exciting place to join, because you're tapping people on the shoulder and saying, did you know that you can turn this into play and have more fun with it, even if it's the most complex task? So before we finish our conversation, I want to bring this reminder that one is not born into their purpose, one steps into their purpose. And it's really our actions and our choices and our ability to believe. The more we believe, the more we align with a different version of life that we're yet to experience and a different version of who we are that we're yet to become. And it just starts with taking those baby steps forward. Just like a baby, we mature spiritually, emotionally, mentally. And you've got something exciting coming in September, the Magic Circle. Can you tell us more about it and invite our listeners to join you?
yeah, sure. So this is my latest online offering. So it's a 6-week online course, once a week for 2.5 hours, where we explore, learn about play science and play theory, and then we use that to weave the gorgeous web by which we can travel the world through constellations as well. And we get to explore our relationships with play, as well as meet some remarkable human beings who are typically, similar, sincere seekers who want to do something better than where they are now, and they're already on their way.
Yes. So, what would you say to people that are looking for some of the magic in the world?
Oh, do what brings you joy. It's like Marie Kondo, the life-changing
Mhm.
magic, tidying up. It's really about find what brings you joy and then hang out with people that bring you joy, and the secret to feeling joy is to be healthy.
Mm.
For people who find joy that is bad for their bodies, well, then that's probably the effect of addiction and not joy, true joy as you would expect it. And there will always be play and laughter. I think, the number of times you laugh a day is a good measure of how
The day
joyful.
well spent.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love this. Joy is the magic. So if you're looking for more magic, just bring more joy into your everyday.
Yes, that's my true north. Yeah.
I
Mhm.
love that. Thank you for joining the Born to Do It podcast, Portia. I really appreciated having you on and hearing about your interesting insights when it comes to playful leadership, because I think you're blending rather concepts that
Mhm.
unite some of the ancestral knowledge into our everyday experience and kind of restoring the continuum of time and space and
Yeah.
bringing more unity in life.
Well, and play alchemy and playful leadership is a way of remembering, re-including play in our lives when it's at a threat of being squeezed out if we're not careful. And that's the core of our humanity.
Mm. And we're all worthy of being included into the play, into the
We
conversations.
all
So
belong.
we all
Absolutely.
belong.
Mhm.
Thank you for joining me. I wish you a magical end to the year and magical beings to join the magic circle, as in more magical people, because we're the magic, we're the source of magic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stella.